Hey, Mama. So today I'm answering a question I received from one of my podcast strategy clients. She was wondering if her podcast was doing well and wanted to know what defines podcast success and what things she should be looking at or tracking to determine if she is, on the right track, if she is doing what she needs to do to essentially make sure her podcast is successful. And I really loved this question and figured I would bring it here to the podcast. Especially because when you are a business owner with a podcast, your podcast success will look way different than a hobby podcaster, an influencer podcaster. And I've talked about this on the podcast. So that's what we're talking about today. Let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Mama. Welcome to Marketing Without Socials for Moms, the go-to podcast for moms in business who want to stop relying on social media to build their business and build it in a way that fits their current season of life. I'm your host, Andria Singletary, a wife, mama of two, and visibility strategist for moms. Each week, I'm giving you the inside scoop on how to increase your visibility, leads, and sales through podcasting, email marketing, and collaborations. Ready to truly make social media optional in your business? Grab your chai tea latte and let's dive into today's episode. Okay, so how do I know if my podcast is doing well? Every podcaster has wondered this question and has probably even Googled it. I get this question a lot from the mamas I support with podcasting and podcast strategy. And I get it, right? Like, we want to make sure we are doing everything we can to make our podcast a success. But before I answer this question, I do want to touch on something important. As a mom in business with a podcast, you have to remove the emotionality from your podcast stats and stop attaching your worth to your podcast downloads. Now, go back and listen to episode 235, where I talk all about podcast downloads and how they don't really give you a full picture of what's going on with your podcast and how you don't even need thousands or even hundreds of downloads per episode to start signing clients from your podcast. But the reality is that it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole of questioning if you are doing enough with your podcast or feeling like you should be further along in your podcasting journey. And I actually just had the same conversation with another one of my podcast strategy clients. She was feeling down and believing she should be further along with her podcast and was even comparing her podcasting journey to some other podcasters in a similar niche as hers, but who have been at it much longer than her and are much further along. And what I did was, instead of telling her, oh, you shouldn't feel this way, I came at her with a question. I asked her to tell me how often she is signing clients from our podcast and hearing back from her podcast listeners about the impact her content is having on them, about the results they are achieving just from her podcast. And that really helped her shift her focus. She literally had just had someone find and binge her podcast. Then they reached out to her on Instagram sharing how much they have been able to achieve just from her podcast content. And, them going back and forth in the DMs eventually led to that person inquiring about working with her. And honestly, that is way more successful than getting thousands and thousands of downloads per episode. Like, we are business owners. We are not hobby podcasters. We are not influencers. We are not trying to make affiliate income. We are trying to sell our own offers. We are trying to leverage our podcast as part of our marketing and sales strategy, leverage our podcast to attract new clients. And so that is your measurement of success. Now let's dig into this deeper. What actually defines podcast success when you are podcasting for your business? So as I've already mentioned, leads generated. So are people joining your email list from your podcast? And if you can't answer that, that means you need to start tracking that. I know when people are joining my email list from my podcast. I'm able to track that. So I'm able to see how many leads per month I'm actually generating from the podcast. Are people signing up for your freebie, your challenge, your masterclass you are promoting on your podcast? Are people reaching out to you via email or DM, sharing how much they resonate with your podcast content? These are all measurements of success because they are leads you are generating for your business. That's what matters. And during the podcast to clients mini mind, which is happening in just a couple of weeks, I will be sharing my content prompts document. And this is where I break down the different types of content to create at each stage of the customer journey for your podcast. And so the type of content you create to generate leads, that is your top of funnel or your awareness stage content. And in that content prompt stock that I'm going to be sharing, I share multiple different prompts so that way you can create different pieces of content that is going to attract your dream clients, attract those people who are truly a good fit for your offers. Like you literally can do that with your podcast and your podcast content. So that's the first measurement of success, the number of leads you're generating per month, or if you're generating any leads from your podcast. The second one is audience feedback and engagement. So I kind of touched on it a little bit with the leads generated, but are you getting feedback about your content from your podcast listeners? Are they DMing you about specific episodes or sending you emails saying how much that episode impacted them, saying how they were able to achieve X, Y, and Z result just from a specific episode? This audience feedback is so powerful. One, it helps you confirm that your content is resonating with your audience. But two, it allows you to see who your warmest leads are. The people who go out of their way to reach out to you directly are interested in working with you. This is how I actually signed one of my very first one-on-one coaching clients. She sent me a DM on Instagram saying how much she loved my podcast. And she was mentioning like a specific episode she had recently listened to. And then she ended up shifting the conversation, sharing what type of support she was looking for and asking if I offer that type of support. She shared that she really wanted to work with me, but she wasn't sure if I offered the type of support that she was looking for. And so that's what you want. Like, I know people be saying podcast, it's a one-sided conversation. It doesn't have to be. Not how I teach podcasting, not what I show you as far as like the type of content to create. I will show you what type of content to create so that way you are getting those emails, getting those DMs where people are, sharing about how much they love your podcast, how they love this specific episode and whatnot. Like there's different types of content you can create that will get you those type of results. Like this doesn't have to be a one-sided conversation. Okay. The third definition of podcast success, I would say is sales and conversions. Like we are business owners with a podcast. So we are looking at how many conversions are we making from the podcast? That is what matters. Are you signing new clients from your podcast? Are new clients saying they found you through your podcast, that they heard about your offer on your podcast, or that it was a specific episode that helped them realize they needed to join your offer? I say this is like the number one sign of success because it means your podcast content is giving what it's supposed to give, okay? And you're seeing the ultimate results, right? We want to see those conversions. Like we want to reach more people, make a greater impact, and help more people, help them solve X, Y, and Z problem. Now, these are the same type of results that myself and my clients see with our podcast content. So to give an example, one of my clients recently had someone binge her podcast before meeting with her for a discovery call. He came to the call already knowing he wanted to work with her because of her podcast content. And he immediately moved forward with hiring her as his coach. Like her podcast content literally did the heavy lifting for her. Like that discovery call, it was more of just a formality than anything. He didn't have the questions. He already knew he was going to hire her. And it was probably just wanting to get on that call to make sure that she was truly who she said she was. Like, people be out here catfishing people and stuff. But that's what your podcast can do for you. And I have countless examples of signing clients directly from my podcast. Clients telling me it was a specific episode that converted them, or clients quoting my podcast when we're on a sales call. I had someone whom we did the discovery call first, and she had like other calls that she was going to do. But in between that time, she was actually binging my podcast, and my podcast was the determining factor of her wanting to move forward with working with me. And it helped her to realize that she actually had more gaps than she thought. When we first got on the call, she thought her main issue was one thing, but after listening to my podcast, she identified more gaps that she needed support with, and she knew that I could support her in those areas. Your podcast can do that for you. It's all about the type of content you're creating. And so when you are podcasting for your business, your definition of podcast success will be different. Success for you is how many leads you are generating from your podcast each month, audience feedback and engagement, and the number of sales or conversions you're seeing from your podcast monthly. If you're wondering how to boost each of these for your podcast, like I said, it's all about the type of content you create for each stage of the customer journey. And that's exactly what I'm showing you how to do during the Podcast to Clients mini mind. So head on over to mamaturnedmompreneur.com/mini mind to grab your spot now. All right, mama, I'll catch you in the next episode. Hey, mama. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to hang with me. I would love to keep the conversation going. So head to mamaturnedmompreneur.com/marketing without socials to join my email community. I share even more tips and strategies for building a business that doesn't rely on social media and one that fits your current season of life, as well as more behind the scenes of mom and business life. All right, mama, that's it for today, but I'll catch up with you again next week.